Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Elizabeth and I work for the Libertarian Party of Georgia. And I appreciate you all being here to talk about this topic, which is very much of importance to people who have regard for freedom and civil liberties. So, the way that I initially got involved with this subject was by the invitation of a local official who knew that the Libertarian Party has concerns about surveillance in our local community. And so I attended a meeting, which was an implementation meeting, one that was not open to the public, and learned about some of the things that were happening and exactly how this was being implemented and what it entailed. And I was familiar with smart city, the idea of smart cities, but I really didn't have any idea exactly how all of this was going to work and how it is intended to impact every aspect of our lives. So, a good place to start would be to talk about what exactly is a smart city. So, in a smart city, data is collected and communicated and sent to central servers in the city, in which AI takes this data and crunches this data and then turns it into usable information that AI then can trigger human intervention or use to monitor conditions and make decisions about what's going on. And I scoured the internet and looked for different articles on the subject. And if you're going to say, what is smart city? I think a good question is, why do we need smart cities? And according to a lot of these articles that I read, there were a certain number of goals. So one would be efficiency goals, so that different city services are administered less expensively and optimized. There were environmental goals, which largely wrapped around cutting CO2 emissions and addressing climate change. There were social goals, for example, augmenting a city's social inclusiveness, and security goals, which were to increase safety and reduce crime. And the basis for this was a document that is published by the UN on their website, which is their 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And the goal is that there will be 500 smart cities in the US by the year 2025. Now, if you do the math, 500 smart cities, that means that pretty much every mid to large size city in the country will be in some phase of smart development by the year 2025. The smart city is based upon the digital twin. So basically, every single aspect of the city is captured digitally. And this is everything that's animate, everything that's inanimate, every surface, every building, every person, every vehicle, every interaction. There are different layers to this digital twin. So the first three layers would be the infrastructure, the buildings, the actual terrain. So if you have lakes, rivers, whatever. And then on top of that, you have that is what's called the static layer. And then you have the dynamic layer, which are the things that move around the city. So people, vehicles, that is the dynamic layer. And then on top of that, you have the digital layer. And this is the layer that collects the information from the static and the dynamic layers. So that would be different sensors, different cameras, connected devices, the Internet of Things, and so forth. And then the final layer is the virtual layer. That takes the data that's collected from the digital layer and it crunches that data so that it can be used for various purposes. So to collect the data, there are different devices. It's an entire system of cameras, license plate readers, sensors, drones, GPS systems, and then connected devices. So that could be smartphones, wearables, any number of things. And what you see in the image there is called a smart pole. And these are used in some places. They're not used in all places. But this is a place that has, it's like an all-in-one place for these different devices. So there are different kinds of sensors on these poles that can do things like measure heat and different chemicals in the atmosphere. There is generally a Wi-Fi hotspot so that people can connect with phones and other devices. There are cameras, there are license plate readers. All of these things are on the pole itself. So the cameras work in capturing the dynamic layer through facial recognition software. So if the camera sees people on the street, it's not, okay, there are 3 people on the street. It's Sue Smith, Joe Jones, and Bob Brown are on the street. So the people are not only photographed, they're also identified through facial recognition. And this is a biometric identification tool that measures the different planes and angles of your face. And in the same way that a human being can look at a face and capture all of the angles and planes to know who that person is, AI can also do that. It takes those measurements between those different angles and planes and turns it into a mathematical formula. And that formula uniquely identifies a person. So it converts that, and then it compares that conversion to a database of known faces. And that, for example, a driver's license photo database. And then that facial recognition is put together with a file of information that creates a digital identity for every person. So a digital identity is a national ID scheme that is used so that people, for convenience, can use phones and so forth instead of actual physical license. And when you take the digital identity and marry it with a file of information, you can think of some of the things that are often on your driver's license, your address, and so forth. But it also can include other things like fingerprints, your iris print, your vaccination status. Any number of pieces of information can be included with this digital identity. And this is something that we're going to talk about more later on. Oops. Okay. So the vehicles are tracked through license plate readers. Now, we need to talk about the difference between passive and active surveillance. Active surveillance is what takes place if someone is suspected of a crime and then law enforcement targets that person for surveillance. Passive surveillance is when information is collected generally about the population, everyone in the population, whether or not they are accused of wrongdoing, just in case that information is needed later. So all of these things, the license plate readers, the facial recognition, all of this is passive surveillance. So when a vehicle drives by the license plate reader, it captures a picture of the vehicle, sometimes maybe the passengers in the vehicle as well. And it includes the location, the date and time. Sometimes there might be also different sensors on the license plate reader that can measure other things as well. So this is all information, all goes to central servers. And you can see where this could capture, it could be a very intimate portrait of an individual's life when all of that information is collected together. And lastly, we have the Internet of Things. Now, not all of these things are currently being used in Smart City, but they have the potential for being connected to Smart City. This is what would take place in a true digital twin. And ultimately, the goal is to have all of these things connected. This includes things from all kinds of different industries. So think of the education system, think of the healthcare system, industry, transportation, and then your own individual things like your home surveillance system, your utility meters, different appliances like television sets and refrigerators, and the things like your phones and the different wearables that people are using now. So when all of this information is collected, it is processed through artificial intelligence. And these are digital systems that have human characteristics. So they are able to reason and discover meaning, make generalizations, learn from past experience in the same way that a human being would. The difference is that we as human beings have limitations. You can only remember so many things. You can only process so many different things. But with artificial intelligence, all you have to do is add on more storage space, and the amount of processing and remembering that can happen then it's virtually unlimited. So the artificial intelligence has the ability to not only simply identify people, it can take specific characteristics of what is happening with that person's face. Well, not only their face, even the way that they're walking, um, and other things to make different generalizations about them. So it can look at the expression on your face to read your emotion. It can look at your eye movements to tell what you're looking at. Are your eyes red? Are they watery? How big are your pupils? That can be used to tell whether someone had been taking drugs or is on medications, and different facial attributes. And this can make implications about a lot of different things. So judging by what you look at, they can tell not only are you looking at this billboard, is our marketing scheme effective? It can also tell how sleepy you are. It can tell what your sexual preference is, all kinds of different personality traits. So there are a lot of really good things that can come from a smart city implementation. And I like to call these things the carrots. These are the desirable results that we are going to have from smart city, all the perks that it's going to provide for us. And these are the things that are often talked about in order to achieve public buy-in. So, of course, there is going to be all kinds of convenience because there will be public Wi-Fi hotspots to use. Different apps will help do things like find a parking spot. Your trash collection will be more efficient. Well, that goes under efficiency. So rather than going out in one swoop and collecting all the trash, they can monitor the trash cans and tell whether they're full or empty, and then only collect the ones that are full. The street lights will only have to shine if there are people on the street. There is also safety. There will be early notification if there is a fire. There are water level sensors that can measure rivers and tell if there's a danger of flooding. But more than anything, the surveillance aspect of this is being sold as a way to catch the bad guys. Crime is going up all over the country, and people are calling for the government to do something about the crime. And this tends to be the answer. If there are cameras everywhere, we can apprehend all of the criminals. So, as you can imagine, there are also negative aspects that are not often talked about, and I like to call these the sticks. And I want to talk about 3 different kinds of sticks. The first being things that are currently being done here in the US. The second, things that are being done in other countries. And third, things that are not yet being done, but the potential is there. These are the things that are on the horizon. And before we get into talking about the sticks, I want to consider a rule of thumb for government policy. And one of our libertarian heroes, Spike Cohen, I felt summed this up quite well in this Twitter post. So before deciding if a government should have a specific power, imagine the politicians you hate being in charge of it, because at some point, someone as bad as them will be. So all of these different things, if they're in the hands of a government that's wasteful, inefficient, or authoritarian, what is this going to look like? So things that are currently being used, automated license plate readers, they have been around for a long time. And as I mentioned before, this is passive surveillance. The difference between the way that they have been used in the past and the way they are being used now is they were on police cars. So if a police car came up behind you, they would read your license plate and they would know all of these different things about you. The way that this is going to be done going forward is there will be license plate readers on every street and on every corner. So they will not only be pulling up a profile of a person just because they're behind them, they will know where every person is going, where every person has been, and there will be a permanent record of this information. Now, the data, generally, the systems behind this are private corporations. So what is being done with all of this information? It's being collected and entrusted to private corporations. And the standards for how they are using this information are lax or sometimes not even existent at all. And how they protect this information. All of this is very unclear, and it's definitely not standardized. So if this information, you can look at the possibilities, if it's shared among other private entities, if your auto insurance company, if they find out that you have been to the liquor store 3 times this week, or if your health insurance company finds out that you go to Dunkin' Donuts on the way to work every day. These are things that could affect your insurance premiums. That's just one example of how this information could possibly be used. Now, this report was written in 2013, and at that point in time, they determined that less than 0.2% of the data that was collected was actually significant in solving crime. But even if you doubled, quadrupled, multiplied that, still it's going to be, what, 2%, still in the 90s, 98%, 97% of that information is still going to be information that is collected on innocent people that is not even significant in solving crime. There is a history as well of automated license plate readers on cars being used to monitor the movements of drivers for political purposes. People have been monitored at gun shows. People have been monitored, as you can see in this letter, in 2009. They were monitored as to who was going to an Obama rally and who was going to a Palin rally. So it really doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. This is going to impact all of us. And also all of this information that goes into databases, we already have significant problems of abuse of people that have access to the databases using it for information other than what it's supposed to be used for. Drones are also currently used in cities. You can see the article here that Savannah, back in 2020, was using drones to enforce social distancing. So they flew drones over the city and monitored people. And if they got too close together, the drones would scream at them. And these drones are capable of all kinds of different things. They can intercept private phone calls. They can determine what your GPS coordinate is. They have different devices like infrared scanning, thermal cameras, facial recognition, and they have also been equipped with both lethal and non-lethal weapons. So what this is all coming together to create is an internet of eyes. The goal of a lot of these smart city initiatives is not to only use public cameras in public areas, but to also use private cameras. So as you see here, the mayor of Montgomery in this news article said that the city is working to gain access to every camera in Montgomery, both private and public. So that means every Ring doorbell that anyone has can be accessed. This is already happening in a lot of places. So it is to the point where private and public are now no longer distinct. The number of cameras you kind of, people will think automatically when you think of a surveillance state with lots of cameras, they think of China. But actually, China is number 2 with the per capita number of cameras. The United States is number 1, and London is 3rd. In 2019, there were 15 cameras per 100 citizens, but we are quickly approaching where we will have more cameras than we will have people in the worldwide population. So another thing that is currently used is predictive policing. And this is when they gather personal data and statistics to predict the likelihood that someone will commit a crime. And then they use that data to guide law enforcement decisions. So there are some successes with using predictive policing, but of course, those successes come at the cost of the innocent, because we do live in a country where we are supposed to be guaranteed a presumption of innocence. And when you're having to guide your behavior according to whether you might be suspected of committing a crime, then that's not really what a free society is supposed to look like. So if you take this practice, which has already been in place for many years, and you marry that with automation, it can create some problems in addition to the problems that there already are with predictive policing. As it is now, a police officer, if he or she suspects someone of having committed a crime, they have to articulate what that is that made them suspicious. If the intervention is based on an algorithm, then it simply means that the computer told me to do so. And this really creates a chilling effect on a population, because you're not only thinking about what your actions are, but what your actions might be perceived to be. So the final thing that is currently being used is in our education system. AI is being used with social and emotional learning. There are algorithms that are currently being used to screen children in the classroom to predict child abuse. There are different systems that are being used, for example, talk pedometers that analyze parental conversations, send those conversations, that's conversations that they have with their children. They put those conversations up in a cloud where they are analyzed, and then the parents are given results so that they can better communicate with their children. There are also different games where they get children to play together, and they analyze the different activities and things that they do when they play, so that they can monitor children and target them as having social and emotional problems that that require intervention. So some of the things that are being done throughout the world, but not necessarily here in the US. One example of this is the situation in Myanmar. Now, people will often say, if you don't have anything to hide, then you have nothing to worry about. But if you're not familiar with the situation in Myanmar, they had a democratically elected government which was meeting opposition with the military. That military overthrew the democratically elected government in a coup. While that tension was taking place, there were certain activists that were speaking out against the military. And the military then, when they took over in the coup, they then targeted those activists which were engaged in a perfectly legal activity. They used the Chinese facial recognition technology to track down those activists and execute them. In Australia in 2021, a software was a trial of a software took place where they used facial recognition to police the pandemic lockdowns. So you could have your smartphone. If you wanted to go out and about, you would leave your phone at home. Otherwise, they could use GPS to track where you were. So to prevent people from doing this, they would send you a text message and you would have a number of minutes to take a picture of your face and send it to them, to the police, so they could verify that you were where your smartphone was. Now, I have a short video clip here that is from Ken Roth, the former director of Human Rights Watch. I think that you are probably familiar with social credit scores that are being used in China, but he does a much better job of explaining how all of this works. So I'm going to let him do this.
China has become an uninhibited surveillance state. Let me give two examples of this, and this will illustrate it. One is Xinjiang, the other is the Social Credit Index. Xinjiang is the region in northwestern China, principally where Uyghur Muslims live. And the Chinese see the Uyghur Muslims and other Turkic Muslims there as a security threat. So they have imposed a surveillance state like a sort that exists no place else in the world today. They have police who run around with little handheld devices. And my organization, Human Rights Watch, actually just reverse engineered one of those devices to see what does it show. And it shows that any police officer can gain access to basically 11 pages of data about every individual in Xinjiang. And this will show everything from their political loyalty to who they hang out with, who their family members are, what their blood type is, how much electricity they consume, what happens if their phone ever goes dark, all these supposedly suspicious activities. And it'll then indicate, is this a person who should be interrogated, somebody who should be detained? That system has led to 1 million Uyghur Muslims being put in detention for re-education, because according to this intensive surveillance state, they were deemed unreliable. They were too religious, they were too critical of Xi Jinping, what have you. So that shows you, what happens when you have a government that is determined to surveil for security purposes with no inhibition whatsoever. Now, they're beginning to roll this out across the country, and the form it's taking nationwide, social credits. And the brilliance of the social credit index is that it's a method of control that doesn't usually even need imprisonment. Because what it will do once it's operational, and they're moving very quickly toward this, is that everybody in the country will have a score. And it will be a score in part social reliability. Do you take the garbage out? Do you keep your yard clean? Are you a nice neighbor? Innocuous things. Do you jaywalk? But also political things. Do you criticize the government? Do you hang out with people who criticize the government? Do you appear on panels like this, which would definitely work against our score? Are you in the audience? And everybody gets a score, and then the government allocates different social benefits according to your score. Do you get to live in a decent city? There are finite goodies in China. Depends on your score. Do you get to send your kids to a good school? Do you get a passport? Do you get to travel on the bullet train? Do you get to see the latest movie? These little things that people want depends on their score. And so suddenly, because people do these things, they're going to start adjusting their behavior. And it's a brilliant method of social control that only in the extreme cases needs imprisonment, and otherwise it just controls people on the basis of data. The kind of thing that Yuval's talking about. So this is where we're going if we don't control it. And we're not going to put the genie back in the bottle in terms of making it impossible to collect the data, making it impossible to analyze the data. But we have to develop rules of privacy, of data protection, that say that there are certain things governments can't do, are not allowed to do with your data. This is a dictator's dream. You can control your people without even imprisonment. Why not? So I think that we see where we're going, and it's up to us whether we're going to prevent us from getting there.
So the file that he was talking about with the handheld device, which would be similar to like a radar gun, they just would point the device at someone and could identify them. This is how predictive policing is practiced by the Chinese authorities. And all of the information goes into what is known as the police cloud. And this has all kinds of information. How many in China, how many American movies did you watch? How many hours did you play video games? How much electricity are you using? What kind of deliveries are you getting? What kind of groceries do you buy? It is all in there in the police cloud. And then they use that information for geofencing, which is creating a virtual perimeter for a real world geographic area. So that digital identity that I was talking about earlier, your access then to various things is determined by your digital identity. And so if you see, like Amazon now has palm recognition in order to get into Whole Food stores. So if you lived in China and they determined that you had eaten too much that week or whatever you did that they didn't like, you would go to use your palm recognition in order to get into the Whole Food store, and you would be denied access. So now let's talk a little bit about where we are going. And I have one more video clip that I would like to share. And this is Yuval Noah Harari. And this is a talk that he gave to the 2020 meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos. And here he talks about, he has written a book called Sapiens, which is a very popular book. And that is one of the things that he is well known for. But he is talking here about some of the dangers that come from AI.
Alongside inequality, the other major danger we face is the rise of digital dictatorships that will monitor everyone all the time. This danger can be stated in the form of a simple equation, which I think might be the defining equation of life in the 21st century. B times C times D equals R, which means biological knowledge multiplied by computing power, multiplied by data, equals the ability to hack humans, R. If you know enough biology and you have enough computing power, you can hack my body and my brain and my life, and you can understand me better than I understand myself. You can know my personality type, my political views, my sexual preferences, my mental weaknesses, my deepest fears and hopes. You know more about me than I know about myself. And you can do that not just to me, but to everyone that understands us better than we understand ourselves, predict our decisions, can manipulate, and can ultimately make decisions for us. Now, in the past, many tyrants and governments wanted to do it, not understood biology well enough. Enough computing power and data to hack millions of people. Neither the Gestapo nor the KGB could do it. But soon, at least some corporations and governments will be able to systematically hack people. We should get that we no longer mysterious souls. We are now hackable animals. That's what we are. The power to hack human beings can, of course, be used for good purposes, like providing much better healthcare. But if this power, for 21st century Stalin, will be the worst totalitarian regime in human history, and we already have a number of applicants for the job of 21st century Stalin. Just imagine North Korea in 20 years, when everybody has to wear a biometric bracelet which constantly monitors your blood pressure, your heart rate, your brain activity, 24 hours a day. You listen to a speech on the radio by the great, you know what you actually feel, and clap you. Angry, they know you'll be in the gulag tomorrow morning. And if we allow the emergence of such total surveillance regimes, don't think that the rich and powerful in places like Davos will be safe. Just ask Jeff Bezos. In Stalin's USSR, the state monitored members of the communist elite more than anyone else. The same will be true of future total surveillance regimes. The higher you are in the hierarchy, the more closely you will be watched.
So this is a time where we need to have a discussion as to at what costs are we willing to have safety. So whenever you rely on the government to provide safety for you, the degree to which you require that from them is the same degree to which you are going to have to give up freedom. And so we need to think about how much exactly are we willing to give up and where do we draw the line? And to do this going forward, we need to have some basic rules. We need to determine who owns this data. Now, in my local city council meeting, there was a deputy city manager who showed the council how on her smartphone from anywhere in the world, she could have access to all of the cameras in the city and monitor any of the cameras whenever she liked. So these are asymmetries of power. They can monitor us, but we cannot monitor them. So we need to have government transparency to where they are monitored to the same degree that we are monitored if this has to take place. So if the mayor knows where you are in the city at any moment simply by looking, then you should have the same right to know where the mayor is. The danger comes from the asymmetry of power, with all of that lying in the hands of the government and none of it lying in the power of the people not even having control over their own data. So anything that is done with AI should always be helpful and not hurtful. And this needs to be noted and written down and codified. That doesn't mean that it will always be observed. Obviously, we have a Bill of Rights, and that Bill of Rights is trampled all the time. But you have to at least have that basis. Otherwise, you don't have anything to stand on. And we need to always remember that spontaneous order from below is always preferable to planned order from above. it is a much richer and kinder society if you collapse on the street and all of your fellow citizens come and run to help you. That is always preferable than you collapse on the street and you lie there till AI triggers an ambulance to come and get you. So this is the kind of society that we are shifting towards when we rely on AI to fulfill all of these different societal roles. So where do we go from here? The first thing that we have to do is we have to educate people, because so few people are talking about this and so few people actually know all of the ramifications. And we need to avoid it when we can. So if you know that there are parts of town where there are invasive technology and surveillance, you can avoid those, or you can use one of the different methods that are pictured here. But you have to know that going forward, the ability to avoid is going to be reduced more and more till eventually you can't avoid anymore. We can resist this by organizing groups of concerned citizens in your area. And a good place to start, if there isn't already things documented as to exactly what your local area has done, then you can fill out a Freedom of Information request and just organize with others to talk to your city council and make a plan for going forward. And most importantly, we have to start inspiring a mindset that appreciates freedom and is not willing to give up our freedom for safety. So what we would like to do is we would like for you to take this information, and we can give this presentation if you have certain groups, if you have different like civic organizations that might be concerned about this, churches, criminal justice, activist groups, whatever, then we can give this presentation to them, or we can train you so that you can give the presentation as well. And if you're interested in doing that, then you can contact us by operations@lpgeorgia.com and include Smart City in the subject line, and that information will come to me. So I want to leave you with one final word. We as Americans have often come to take our freedom for granted. We say that we live in a free country, even though that freedom has been less and less and less over the last few decades. And we have a tendency to think that we will always live in a free country. This is just the way that it is. But the reality of the situation is that freedom is fragile. It's not the default setting, and it's not something that is guaranteed. It's something that we have to struggle to maintain, and that freedom is always in danger. And we have to be able to escape tyranny if we want to live in a free society. So remember that there was a time in this country where it was legal for one human being to own another human being. And although some people say that that was brought about, the end of that was brought about by Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, I disagree with that. I think that it was brought about through the work of the abolitionists and people like Harriet Tubman. And they were able to help enslaved people be free by sneaking them out through the Underground Railroad. And if we have a world that is full of smart cities, there's no escape from tyranny. and something like the Underground Railroad can no longer exist. So this is the end of the presentation. There are different resources that you can access, and you can always email me at that email address. Also, if there was something that you missed and that you would like to have access to. And I'm